Hey everyone, and welcome to our third Focused Friday today. And today we have Larissa. And if you don't remember her from our Pilates video, which was in our first Focused Friday, she is back again to talk about Chinese traditional medicine therapy. Did I say that right, Larissa?
Yeah, the traditional Chinese medicine and food therapy involved in that.
Awesome. But tell us a little bit about yourself. So give us a little background, kind of what you're doing now, how you got involved in this, and then we'll start rolling with our questions about what it is exactly.
Yeah, so I am a licensed acupuncturist in the state of Minnesota. I completed my master's degree in training in Bloomington, Minnesota in 2012, and then I did my PhD in China for 3 years. Came back and have been working ever since then for mHealth Fairview system. And my story of getting involved in acupuncture kind of mirrors actually my story of getting involved in Pilates. It all kind of happened around the same time for me. When I was about 17, I was diagnosed with rheumatoid arthritis. It was pretty debilitating in my life at that time. I suffered a lot. I couldn't do a lot of my normal activities. I'd been a really active and athletic person. So Pilates was one path I found to really help move my body in a way that was gentle, and I was able to get a good workout and get good movement in. And then the other piece of that is I sought help with Chinese medicine and acupuncture. And together with both of those things, with dietary changes, with lifestyle changes, I haven't taken any medication for rheumatoid arthritis in I don't know how many years now, over 10 years.
That's awesome.
Pretty much symptom free. So whether you want to call that cured or in remission, haven't had to deal with it in many years. So I thought it was such a great tool and so interesting and so fascinating. I was like, how is this working? What's going on with this? So I decided that I wanted to become a Pilates trainer and then also become an acupuncturist.
Amazing.
That's an incredible story. Wow.
Oh, I didn't lock my door, so I have a kitty visitor. Sorry.
Hello, welcome, kitty. That's so awesome. Yeah, I think that the idea of Chinese medicine, right? Sometimes when you're not fully well versed, you almost want to go, awesome, great, but you don't want to ask more questions. But that's what today is for. So tell us more. What's actually underneath the umbrella of Chinese medicine, or what all does that entail?
Right. So usually most commonly people know me as an acupuncturist. They think of acupuncture. A lot of people in this country don't really understand or use the terminology of traditional Chinese medicine. But traditional Chinese medicine is actually an entire system of medicine. So that includes preventative treatment, which is actually a big part of it. But it also includes a full diagnosis and treatment of any kind of disease utilizing a wide range of modalities. So often the most famous one of these is acupuncture, but there's also a lot of other modalities we're trained in, such as cupping, gua sha, tuina, which is a form of Chinese medical massage, exercise therapies such as Tai Chi and Qigong, herbal medicine, and also food therapy. So that's just one piece of all of our tools that we can use in Chinese medicine.
Yeah, so a lot there, right? Like a lot more than, like you said, is it Chinese medicine? Is that just tinctures and herbal supplements, or just acupuncture? So if we're talking more about food today and really digging in more with how we can connect, like Hannah and I are trained in, both as dietitians, we have a different viewpoint of nutrition, but we also really do value the holistic piece of nutrition and how to see food as like a healing source, right? And so there's different angles to see that. And so can you explain kind of some of your viewpoint on how food is medicine?
Yes. So there's an old saying in Chinese medicine that medicine and food share the same source. So there's no hard and fast line between the medicinal substances and foods. Every food obviously has its impact on the body. People's bodies are all different, right? Some people have allergies to food. Some people react differently to certain foods. I always think it's important to remember that so many pharmaceutical medications come from plants. Many of them are based on plants. And now, of course, they're made in a lab and altered, but I think that's really important to remember. A lot of herbs and plants can also be considered food. They're things we eat, and they're also things that medications have been made out of.
Yeah, like aspirin. Like what's that? What's it? White willow or willow? What is it? I don't, yeah.
Willow bark.
Yes, I'm like, it's some bark. White
But
willow bark. Something that's
and I'm really bad at remembering the Latin and, you know, more slang herbs. I'm always like, oh, I know the Chinese name. What is the Latin name again?
That's always so hard. There's too many names. You gotta keep it simple.
So in your like in your education that you've had with the food therapy piece, do you go more with therapeutic doses of foods that could potentially fix the person's concern, or do you try to go more with like the tinctures, supplements, that type of route?
Yeah, well, it really depends. So food therapy is really seen mostly as preventative. That's a huge focus in Chinese medicine. It's really the cornerstone. We want to keep the body strong to ward off any illness or disease. So often it's used as prevention. They teach ways to eat, to keep the body strong, to nourish the body. Although when we have a state of disease, then we might want to look at adjusting some foods as well. So also we can go into things like herbal medicine for that as well. There's a lot of similarities between herbs and food. A lot of herbs are food. For example, we use goji berries, Chinese yam, several different things that we could actually just say, well, that's food, but we would also make it into an herbal formula.
Right.
So there's a lot of different ways we can go about it, but absolutely we would look at some dietary components as well to deal with any kind of illness.
So let's say there is illness, maybe even something as simple as like what we all deal with on a yearly basis, usually somehow, like a cold and flu symptom or something that you might be dealing with even with what's going on in our country right now. So how would you handle or what would you tell somebody that's coming down with any type of symptom of just feeling under the weather?
Well, so there's a lot of different recipes we have, which I'm going to go over a little bit later that can address some of these symptoms. But basically, I'll give just a little bit of background and some of the terminology, because sometimes it's really hard for people to understand. Chinese medicine speaks in kind of a totally different language than Western medicine. So just kind of broad overview. TCM medical theory in general really talks about balance. We want there to be balance in the body, and any kind of dysfunction or disease or pain or issue or problem, however small, however big, comes from any kind of imbalance in our system. So this is really comparable in like the Western terminology of homeostasis in the body, right? We have like, if we have too much of one hormone, it's going to cause a problem, or too little. So everything needs to be in balance. So our whole focus of any treatment is to balance things. Relating to food, of course, if we have too much food and not enough exercise, then we can start to see like actual weight gain. Or vice versa. If we have too much exercise but not enough food, this can also lead to problems. So again, thinking in dietary terms, really want to balance our food with activity and rest as appropriate. And talking more about diseases in Chinese medicine and the terminology, it's really a beautiful product of the ancient roots of this medicine. This is 5,000 years old. They didn't know what virus and bacteria and these things were all those years ago. So they used what was around them, what they did know and understand, which is the natural world. So you're going to hear terms like cold and heat and wind and dry and damp. And these are all external. They can be internal as well, but disease factors. And so just for a brief little example on that, like wind cold or wind heat, we kind of divide cold or flu symptoms into those two categories. There could be more than that, but just simply the wind cold, you'll have more cold-like symptoms. So you're going to have more pronounced chills than a fever maybe. You're going to have clear mucus. But if you have a wind heat, you're going to have more symptoms that you would correlate with heat. So maybe a higher fever, maybe more redness of the face or the eyes, just in general, more kind of inflammatory type symptoms that are a little more heat-like. So we can balance those two things out, balance the cold, balance the heat, come back to a homeostasis in the body. We can do that through a lot of different things, acupuncture, herbs, but also thinking about food in these categories as well. one other short thing I want to mention is that if you do look into Chinese dietary therapy, if you read anything on it, the organs they talk about a lot in Chinese medicine for digestion are stomach and spleen. And our spleen has nothing to do much with digestion in terms that we know these days. So it's really just the terminology of Chinese medicine, but we want to really support the stomach and spleen. Those are the words we talk about a lot. Supporting the qi, the defenses, the natural abilities of the stomach and spleen. The stomach functions more like a pot, which that's really truly how the stomach functions. Yeah. We're accumulating all the food and the digestive juices there. And they say the spleen is like a fire underneath that pot that really helps to break down the food and extract the nutrients from it. So that's really kind of more like what our intestines actually physically do. Mm-hmm. But in Chinese medicine, we say spleen. So it can be just a little bit confusing when we're talking about that.
Sure.
But now I feel like I'm kind of rambling on about
No, it's good. No, I think it's good.
Yeah. I never thought about that. Like you always hear about the spleen being something that's not an organ that you actually really need. Mm-hmm. It always has seemed very confusing to me because I'm like, well, why do you have it then? So to put it in that,
definitely.
It's a fire that like kind of like stokes, like you said, the digestive juices is really like a cool visual.
And as far as what we know of our stomach, like you said, it's like that a pot that you're accumulating all the different foods. So did I hear you right, or am I assuming right as far as so the spleen is stoking the heat, but like your stomach should be hot, kind of like, or in a way like it should be hot, and probably since there's stomach acid, assuming like you said, I think dryness or dampness, assuming that the stomach doesn't want to be, or we shouldn't have a dry stomach, or how does that work? And as far as balance?
Yep. So kind of using that terminology again, the stomach never wants to be dry. The stomach wants to be more wet. The spleen, however, wants to be dry and more fiery to help boil the pot of the stomach. So, and using those terms, one thing we really want to avoid is spleen dampness. It's a really common term. We want to nourish the spleen, drain the damp. So it sounds really funky, but that's what we're talking about, is we want the stomach to be full of the food. We want the spleen to be working to properly extract the nutrients from the food.
What would someone notice if they were like, or what would you notice in someone and you would say, yep, there's some spleen dampness going on, or like what would they be showing signs of?
So dampness, you can kind of think about damp in the natural world. What is damp? It's a little more wet, maybe a little more bogged down. So in dampness, we can kind of think of, especially in the digestive tract, oftentimes it can be like more loose stools, watery or loose stools, more of a feeling of bloating in the stomach, a feeling of kind of heaviness in the body and limbs, typical kind of damp headaches, we call them, or where you feel like you have that band around your head, a little more pressure in the head, kind of fogginess. You can't think clearly, as if you're walking through like a damp, not damp, but a foggy street, so that's damp. That's a lot of humidity and moisture in the air, and you can't quite see clearly. So things are just a little more foggy, unclear, you're more tired, these kind of symptoms.
Got it. Okay. Interesting. And so as far as temperature, how does that relate to the foods, like the different temperature in foods, or is that where you want to maybe tackle some of those concepts?
Yes. So one big difference in Chinese medicine food therapy is, again, we didn't know anything about calories or vitamins or minerals thousands of years ago. So the way that they classified foods is exactly how they classify herbs. They use temperature and they use taste. So taste or flavor, there's sour, bitter, sweet, spicy, and salty. And then temperatures are cold, cool, neutral, warm, and hot. So foods are all classified along this spectrum. Temperature especially is really important because as you kind of said, that we really want the whole digestive system to be warm. We want to keep it working and moving and warm. And as things start to get cold, we start to get more of damp in our system. Okay. So we can really affect the temperature of the food. I mean, the food naturally has a temperature to it. And then we can affect the temperature by cooking as well, or freezing something as well.
Sure. Oh, I guess I didn't realize that it was always. Oh no, I did. Like as far as raw food is typically cold. Like I think I've heard. So sure. What about even ice? Ice cold, right? So
Yeah, that is
avoiding the.
ice is the coldest. So as far as drinks and things, yep, ice and ice cold waters. But
There you
then
go.
raw veggies, raw foods,
Yeah.
raw fruits are our coldest, and then it kind of goes up from there. Lightly steamed, boiled, stewed, and then at the hottest end are like deep fried and roasted. Can really alter the temperature to make foods more hot or more cold.
So no matter if it's like served that temperature, if you are roasting something and that's how you consume it after it's been roasted, even if it's cooled down from the oven, that's still a hot food.
Exactly. Yep.
Oh, interesting. I didn't know that.
Yes. Even so, if you're eating something cold, like so, for example, ginger is spicy and warm. Not that we'd want to do it, but if you just ate a slice of like raw ginger, well, it's raw, but also it's still hot and spicy
Yeah.
in
Yeah.
nature. So a lot of foods can have combinations of these things because a raw vegetable versus a cooked vegetable is going to change that, but its natural temperature is also going to remain. So something raw is going to have a cold aspect to it, but then it also depends on the flavor of it as
Right.
well.
Okay.
Like a jalapeno or a red pepper or something.
Right, exactly. Those are very spicy and they're raw, but they're still, you know, the heat component kind of outweighs the raw component there a little bit.
Yeah. Cool.
Right.
That's awesome. So, anything that you would say before, I know you have some recipes you said you wanted to share, but is there anything that we should know just even about like food, like why would somebody benefit from food therapy outside of what they're already doing? Like what would kind of be some of those, even some basic, simple things that they could gain from this?
Well, so thinking about food in this way is it's often very different from how we generally think about food.
Mm-hmm.
And so the it can give people a whole new way to look at how they eat rather than focusing, which I'm not saying it's not important. That's why I like people to work with me and people to work with dietitians to see kind of both aspects. Because my goal is not to tell you like what the right vitamins and minerals and caloric content you should be eating is. My goal is to tell you, you know, the quality of the food and how that's going to affect your digestive system and how that's going to affect
Mm-hmm.
the rest of your body and whatever's going on. So it can be a really different way for people to look at the foods they're eating. One of the hardest things to do is to convince people that like ice cold foods are not the best. We're so conditioned, especially in this country, to think like ice water, ice water, ice water in the summer, especially.
Mm-hmm.
A lot of frozen treats and things in the summer. Oh, we're so hot. We got to eat cold things, right? And that can be true. We might want to add some cold things in, but if you actually look at a lot of native cultures in really hot areas of the world, it's typical for them to actually eat more warming foods because this triggers your body to sweat and triggers your body to naturally cool down. If you take in a bunch of ice water, like in that moment, you might feel cooler, but it's actually going to cause your body to work more to heat it up.
Eat back up.
So it's actually going to have the opposite effect, you know, down the road. Instead of in this moment, now I have this ice cold water, I feel good, but a little bit later from now, your body's actually going to be heating up more. So it's interesting, especially with that one, to try to explain to people if they're having a lot of these damp digestive issues. You know, smoothies are great. We can put so much healthy stuff in smoothies, but if someone is drinking a cold smoothie with raw veggies and raw fruits every single day, and they have a lot of these damp symptoms, we might need to look at that and alter that a little bit. How can we change that? Maybe you can have a smoothie a couple times a week instead of every single day starting your day out that way. Or maybe we can look at adding more warming foods and nourishing foods into your diet that way to kind of counteract the, you know, big bunch of cold stuff you just dump on it in the morning. So it just gives people a really different way to look at food and consider it, I think.
Or maybe it's like doing a smoothie, but not doing those frozen items. So making sure that you're using fruit that's you're doing like fresh berries rather than frozen berries or something. So the smoothie's still going to be all that good nutrients, but then you're not getting that like really frozen cold.
Right. Exactly. The physical temperature of the thing you're taking in, and then also like the temperature of the food. So like raspberries are actually considered a little bit more warming in general in nature, whether the raspberry is raw or if you like cooked raspberry,
Mhm.
So in general, we could try to think about adding more veggies and fruits, even if they're going to be raw, that have more warming qualities about them. So a lot of different ways we can address that.
Yeah, that's awesome. I think it's like you said, just a different way and another way to customize. And that's what we always try to pride ourselves on. Like we're not just going to fit this one size fits all approach. So if we can customize, like, hey, you have some slow digestion like symptoms, and even though you like smoothies, maybe we shouldn't do them as much, like that example. So I know you mentioned ginger, and I think we talk about ginger a lot as far as digestive support as well. And so we love that you're like, okay, there's something to this. So can I jump to some of those recipes? Can we talk about how you can use some of like ginger for one of those ingredients? So I know you sent me some. Share this quick. Get this information up here so we know what kind of foods you're talking about and how we can actually put these things into action here.
Yes. So one of the most common things I'll recommend for people, if they start to feel any kind of cold or flu symptoms at all, and this can even be a good prevention formula too. Just if you know that, like I usually get, some cold or allergy symptoms coming on in the spring or in the fall.
Mm-hmm.
You don't have to have symptoms to utilize this, but it's just really simple ginger and scallion tea or ginger and scallion soup. You can make it into a broth. You can use it as a base broth for like any kind of soup, just adding ginger and scallion into it. But drinking the tea is just really simple. They're both spicy and warming foods, so that's really useful in these kind of external diseases, we call them, of like a cold or a flu. So you just really, and it can be really to taste. There's no hard and fast rules with how much you have to use. If you can tolerate things being a little bit more spicy, you can add more. I like to do that. The goal should be to warm up your body a little bit. And if you do have some cold symptoms, you might want to sweat a little bit even. So kind of making it a little bit spicier if you're able to handle that. So it's just real simple. You just slice some fresh ginger, slice some fresh scallions. You can just boil it in a pot, usually about 20 to 30 minutes, and then you just strain and drink that. But sometimes I'll also, as though you're going to make loose leaf tea, take that same ingredients, dump it into a cup, and just keep pouring boiling water over it and drink that throughout the day.
Cool.
So really simple.
Super simple. Love it. Well, this is interesting. Some different foods here.
So this is just a fun kind of dessert recipe that is really good as well, nourishing for the lungs. So pear in Chinese medicine is known to nourish the lung, dispel phlegm, stop cough. Honey moistens and nourishes the lung. Cinnamon is more warming, and walnuts are more warming as well. Everything in this in these items is good for the lungs, basically. Cool. So they can make a really nice dessert. You can bake the pears. So this is instead of eating a raw pear, you can bake it and warm the temperature of it a little bit, make it a little bit easier on your digestive system. So this is a pretty simple recipe. You just slice pears in half, take the seeds out, place them in a baking dish. You can chop some walnuts, and then you sprinkle that over the pears. Sprinkle a little bit of cinnamon, a little bit of ginger. If you're really fancy, I'm really not this fancy. I don't even know how to do it, but you can infuse honey with ginger. So there's recipes involving that. I'm sure you can find them online easily. I am not the expert in doing that. But otherwise you just use, powdered ginger, and then you can drizzle with some honey. The recipe in some of my Chinese medicine books, they recommend about a quarter cup, but really you can do it to taste. You don't have to go overboard with it. You don't want to do too much. And then you just bake for 30 to 35 minutes at 350 degrees. That one's really simple and nice.
I love bake for
the lung.
That's delicious.
Yeah, really that's super yummy. All right, this is one I hear about often. I don't know much about congee, so help me out here.
So congee is a traditional rice porridge. It nourishes the digestive system. In Chinese culture, they eat porridge congee all the time. So we can make this available if people are interested to, as like some PDFs, but again, there's no real hard and fast rule because the ratios of grain to liquid may change based on how much you're making, based on what type of grain you're using. Traditionally, they do use short grain white rice, but you are welcome to use brown rice. You can even use oats, steel cut oats, all kinds of different grains you can play around with in congees. And so there's a little bit of instructions. Generally, it's like a 5-to-1 liquid to rice ratio, depending on how you're cooking it. Obviously the time varies if it's a slow cooker or on stove top. But it's very common for everybody's breakfast in China to be a congee or porridge of some sort. So it's just seen as being so nourishing on the digestive tract. And then it's so plain and bland. And then you just add all kinds of stuff on top of that. So there's a lot of good ways to add in things to deal with common cold symptoms. Again, thinking of the ginger and scallion. So instead of making a tea with it, you make your congee, your plain congee, but you add diced ginger, diced scallions. And then this one also has goji berries in it. Goji berries in Chinese medicine are also good for these kind of symptoms. They're really good for the liver, good for your eyes. And I know they have a really high antioxidant content. So they're, those are recommended to be added in the last 15 minutes of this recipe as well. But you can totally play around with this. It doesn't have to be this plain, generally though, when we're not feeling well, people think of things like chicken noodle soup, and that's a little bit bland. So it might be good to have something a little more bland. But you can add in all kinds of things to congee. You can add in, make this more veggie. So you can add in like sweet potatoes, carrots. Those are some of my favorite veggies to add. A lot of people like to add mushrooms in, all different kinds of mushrooms. And for the liquid, you can use just plain water. You can use vegetable broth, chicken broth. You can even use like coconut milk. And then a lot of people traditionally make this with chicken as the meat. And I'm a vegetarian, so I've never made it with meat. So I'm not going to be the greatest at giving instruction on that. But from what I read, they usually cook the chicken thighs in the pot, making the whole congee, and then they take it out, shred the chicken off the thighs, and then put it back in the mixture to eat. So I imagine there's all different, you can add different meats and however you like, but I've never played around with that. And then again, going back to maybe if you're having some lung or coughing symptoms, you can always chop some walnuts, add that on top. And I put on this slide here, this is one really good book. I think there's a fair amount of like Chinese medicine theory discussed as well in this book, but there's a ton of great recipes. You can make congees sweet, you can make them savory. So there's so many ways to play around with it, like I said, with different grains, different ingredients. So that's one good book by Bob Flaws that I really recommend to get a lot of different congee recipes.
Cool.
Sounds awesome. I'm gonna have to try that.
One more question quick before we wrap up. I'm curious about mushrooms, like the specific, if you were to tell Americans, right, what else we can, if we were to pick one mushroom that isn't, the white buttons or the baby bellas that we're often putting on our plates, what's one of the mushrooms that you would say, as far as from your perspective, that's the most healing and supportive for us?
Right. Well, they all kinds of mushrooms are very healing in Chinese medicine. I'm an unfortunate vegetarian. Really can't stand mushrooms. I try. I can sneak them into things. But wood ear mushrooms are very commonly eaten in China. They're really nourishing, we would say, for our kidneys, not necessarily physical kidneys, Chinese medicine kidney, which is the basis for everything in your body. They're very, very nourishing. A lot of people love them. I hate them a little less than other mushrooms. I try to eat them. So I say wood ear mushroom, and they're different. They're not, I don't think they're really a typical thing that people tend to eat in this country. So it might be something new and different to go out and try. Typically you can find them at any Asian grocery store. They taste a little woody. So they're kind of good. for someone that doesn't like mushrooms, that's saying a lot. So
Got it. Good to know. Cool. Well, thanks so much for sharing your information. And we know you're a book of knowledge, and we don't always tap into that book enough. So we're happy to hear more about you. Hannah, do you have any other further questions? Otherwise,
I just want to thank you for sharing
Yeah.
what you did. I feel like we just scratched the surface and we could extend this conversation longer, but we'd love to have you back and discuss a little more.
Yeah, cool. So we'll let people know they can always reach out to you if they've got more questions or need some more support outside of the traditional way of taking care of pain or certain ailments. So definitely reach out to Larissa if you have questions and you're listening to this. So thanks, Larissa. You guys have a fabulous weekend.
happy Friday.
Woo! All right, take care, guys.